Hello and welcome NAEYC members to this very special event. NAEYC governing board elections will be starting soon on January 15th. And in this election, as in all elections, your vote counts and making informed decisions are important. So as many of you know, traditionally during our in-person annual conference, the candidates for governing board wear those big blue buttons so that the conference participants can clearly identify them, and if they so choose, strike up a conversation with them. Well, we didn't have an in-person 2020 conference, so our nominations chair, Stephen Hicks, came up with the idea of this presentation so that you can hear more from the candidates and make informed decisions on your vote for new governing board members. And now let's hear from NAEYC Nominations Committee Chair, Stephen Hicks.
Thank you so much, Ann, and thanks so much for your leadership as president of the board. We have an outstanding slate of candidates this year for the NAEYC board. Many of you got to meet them at the annual conference, which we did virtually. We're so happy to have the additional opportunity for our NAEYC members to get to know these 8 early childhood leaders. I encourage NAEYC members to go to the 2021 NAEYC Governing Board Slate webpage at naeyc.org to see their full bios and short videos before casting your votes. We have 2 candidates for student representatives, 4 for board at large, and 2 candidates for president-elect. I want to start by introducing our student board representative candidates, James and Ian. Members will select one of these 2 candidates to represent the student's voice on the board. Our 2 candidates are James Hernandez from San Antonio, Texas, and a doctoral student at the University of Texas, San Antonio, and Ian Schiffelbein from Albuquerque, New Mexico. I'm sure, Ian, I did not pronounce that correctly, but you'll tell everyone the correct spelling of your name. And a graduate student at New Mexico State University. I'd like you all to respond to this question, each of you. 2021 will bring both challenges and opportunities to the early childhood community. What is one issue about which the NAEYC board should focus facing our members who are students in colleges and universities? James, let's have you start.
Okay, thank you, Stephen. One of the issues and opportunities that I think we're going to have in 2021, and something that I've been advocating for, since I began this process, was providing increased funding for teachers to continue their education. And with COVID, or with the pandemic happening right now, I think this is a great opportunity to recognize the importance that educators, especially early childhood educators, actually play in our society. And so, and I have 2 reasons. One of them is we have an opportunity to bring up that we actually need more teachers in early childhood. We also need more educated teachers in early childhood. And I think we should provide resources either for local government, state government, even national government. And the way I think about it is for other professional organizations or other professional jobs, for instance, maybe even the military. It's very often if somebody goes to the military, they're not expected to pay for their boot camp training. They're not expected to pay for all these things. We as taxpayers do it for them because that's seen as an investment. Same with police officers here in San Antonio. If they are accepted into the police academy, they don't have to pay a dime. They're actually paid to go. We as taxpayers pay for their equipment, we pay for their training. And I think we should do the same thing with our educators. We need to put our focus on our educators, and we don't expect for someone in boot camp, we don't give them a bill and say, hey, this is how much you owe now. We actually provide funding, we actually provide an opportunity for them if they want to pursue that education. The second part to this was that early childhood educators also should should see the need now to get involved politically, because if we're going to talk about funding, we have to be involved in the political process. And from my experience, and just from what I've in discussion with both researchers and practitioners, is that there's almost a mystery behind the political process. There's almost like a fear in behind the political process. And I think we should slowly start focusing on getting more involved, because in order for our funding, and in order for our I guess the focus to increase on early childhood, we need to make our voices heard in the political realm. And so that's what I would kind of fight for. That's what I would argue for, if I were to be on the board. So if that's what our members would like to see, for me to advocate for, then they could definitely vote for me, James Hernandez, on January 15th. So thank you.
Thanks, James. And what do you think are ways in which college students could get more involved in the process, either locally or nationally or at the state level?
Yeah, so even personally, my own journey has started locally. I currently do serve in my local school board, and even at the local level, that is a very good opportunity to learn at least the basic. I don't know what to say, like cogs in the machine, because it involves people, it involves financing, it involves advocacy. There's just so many moving parts to our educational system, and I think, of course, we have to recognize that our teachers need to speak with our politicians. Why? Because our teachers ultimately are going to be teaching the curriculum that is funded, that is recommended, and that is approved by our politicians. So I think just getting involved locally, I mean, even if they are students, like in student government at their local university or college, that is a great way to start. Because I'll definitely start small, because it can definitely get overwhelming if you go to the state or even national level.
Great.
Yeah, thank you.
That's great. Thank you so much, James. Ian, what is one issue about which the NAEYC board should focus that's facing students in colleges and universities?
I think it really speaks to the experience of early childhood professionals in higher education that I was thinking along the same lines as James, issues of accessibility and affordability, because that is a deterrent for a lot of people who are passionate about this, about the work of educating and caring for young children. But I think along with addressing the issues of accessibility and financial support for students going into the field, I think that we also need to support career pathways once they enter the system, especially being a field that has long created employment opportunities for historically marginalized populations. That's my feelings about this are based on my experience as an early childhood educator, as well as a student, because in the programs that I've worked for, two of the most effective tools for teacher retention that I've seen have been access to financial support for higher education, and then a career ladder that reflects those advanced credentials. Thanks to scholarship programs like Teach and work being done at the community college level to improve accessibility, I've seen aides move up to assistants, assistants move up to lead teachers move up to administrators, college professors, academic coaches. While the return on this investment is exponential, these opportunities for career advancement in the childcare sector are also limited. Because this ladder only climbs so far, that's where we start losing a lot of qualified professionals to the public sector. And that's not to say that we don't need qualified professionals in elementary education, because we most certainly do. But for people like me, whose primary interest is in the first 5 years, I don't think that it should have to be an either or decision if I want to be compensated for the education that I've attained. NAEYC's already done a significant amount of work on creating these, supporting these career pathways and advocating for them. recently in the Power to the Profession initiative. They laid out a framework for a career ladder, for what that career ladder might look like, but they also acknowledged the need for adequate funding to make these things happen. I think that right now, under COVID, it's really highlighted the essential nature of early childhood education in both the public and private sector. And it really feels like the time and the opportunity are right to advocate for a return on some of the campaign promises of our incoming administration regarding early childhood education, especially in the area of training and access to education. So as a student member of NAEYC's governing board, I'd be honored to pull from my own experience as a teacher and as a student to promote access and to promote some of these career pathways for those who are currently entering the field.
Thanks, Ian. On that point about accessibility and marginalized communities, what do you think are some of the strategies that NAEYC could deploy to try to broaden that accessibility at our colleges and universities?
Well, like I said, advocacy for funding, for higher education, scholarship programs, grant opportunities. Like I said, I love our community colleges because I feel like that is an access point for a lot of the people in the field. It's more affordable. There are more opportunities, and I also feel like there is a greater emphasis on the younger end of the early childhood spectrum. You know, our infants and toddlers, in the kind of education that's happening in community colleges. So I think putting support behind those kinds of things that are already supporting accessibility in certain ways and expanding those kinds of programs. And I think that along with broadening support for those kinds of things, NAEYC can continue its work with accreditation for institutions of higher education to ensure quality within these programs that students are entering.
Great. Ian, thank you so much. James, thank you so much. I'm going to turn it back to Anne.
All right. Thank you, Stephen. So we also have 4 candidates for board at large seats. NAEYC members can select 2 of the four of the following people. Our first candidate is Christina Casano. She's an associate professor and coordinator of the Early Childhood Graduate Program at Salem State University in Salem, Massachusetts. We also have Shana Cook. Shana is the Senior Manager for Early Learning Systems at the Bainham Family Foundation and lives in Washington, D.C. Stacy French Lee is a Clinical Assistant Professor in the Department of Early Childhood and Elementary Education at Georgia State University, and she lives in Atlanta, Georgia. And our final candidate for the board at large seat is Ray Jaramillo. He is the director of at Alpha School for Young Children and lives in Las Cruces, New Mexico. And so I'd like for you 4 to consider this question. If elected to serve on the board, you will be contributing to board discussions and decision-making on many issues that affect NAEYC members, including the current COVID pandemic, vaccine distribution, and the critical conversations on equity and racial reckoning that have surfaced recently, as well as other topics. I'd like for you to talk about one issue that you think will be important for the board to address. And Christina, we'll start with you.
Okay, thank you. I think it's essential that we address the racial and economic disparities that exist and have existed for some time. These disparities have been exacerbated by the pandemic and the racial violence. We know that these racial and economic disparities have sustained impact on children's mental and physical health, as well as their education. And addressing them is 99% of the work ahead. And I think, like many of you, I feel the weight of that work, and how much needs to be done. And I think first and foremost, as we start to reopen and move forward, we have to get eyes on kids and families. We have to make sure they're healthy and safe and protected from COVID. We have to ensure equity in the distribution of the vaccine. And as a teacher, educator, and a parent, I've been trying to think about, like, what does that look like? You know, how do we move forward? How do we address, you know, these very large issues? And one area of promise that keeps coming to mind is the incredible innovation in outreach that's happening. Teachers, early childhood educators, our workforce is doing incredible things. But as the world kind of gets smaller and smaller, sometimes the size of one room in our home, they're pushing back against closures and creating much more inviting and inclusive spaces for children and families. They're finding really creative ways to get eyes on kids and eyes on families, and to check in to see, you know, how people are doing and what they need. And, you know, a couple of examples, I overheard a parent talking about how terrified her son was to return to school when it had reopened, or preschool when it had reopened. And that had all changed when she received a video from the director that showed his classroom and the changes that were made, the teacher with a mask on and with a mask off. And it shows the changes in the arrival and departure routines. She actually had a teddy bear arrive at school in a car. And that just something that, you know, he'd been going there for years. It was her third child who had gone to this school, and she'd never had a video like this, right? Just one small change made such a big difference. And it really created a very warm and inviting space for this child. I had the opportunity to help build some backpacks with creative materials and story sacks and comfort items that was delivered by school bus to 110 families, along with diapers and formula and food and pamper packages for parents. You know, things that we've never done before to just make sure that our families were okay. I also I have attended a certain professional conference in my pajamas, right? And, you know, had a chance to watch sessions over and over again. I mean, I love our NAEYC conference. And oftentimes I leave thinking, oh, I wish I could watch that again and again. And I had that opportunity this year. And to attend other conferences that I might not have been able to travel to because of expense and time away from work. And lastly, I had an opportunity to attend my son's IEP meeting via Zoom and my daughter's, you know, back to school curriculum night by watching a recording. And for those of you that are parents as well as educators, you know, the back to school night we always miss is our own children, right? Because it's our own classrooms that need us, and sometimes it comes at the expense of our own families. And so, you know, while there's so much work ahead, I really hope that NAEYC takes some time to really reflect on the innovation and the outreach and the way that we're making these really inclusive and accessible spaces, or trying to, during a time of social isolation, and ways that we can think about our own professional development and how we can expand opportunities to connect with each other and build on the innovation and inclusivity that's happening right now.
Thank you, Chris. You know, early on in your response, you mentioned families, and you gave us a couple of examples. Do you have any other examples of how we in the field can be creative and innovative in serving families during this time? The two examples that you gave were excellent. Do you have any others?
You know, I've seen the power of crowdsourcing, right? You know, we have, there's a Head Start program that I work with that desperately needed, you know, underwear for children and socks. You know, and they shared that the very first thing that gets sacrificed when the budget is tight is often underwear and socks, because they're not visible. Or, you know, laundry is done every 14 days and the child may only have 10 pairs of socks. And so I posted that I needed underwear and socks for small children, and I cannot tell you how many items appeared on my doorstep. I live in rural New Hampshire, right? And I have such an incredibly giving community, but I also had people who sent money so that I could go out and purchase the materials and drop them off. It's the power of just of asking, and for people who are desperate to help others. You know, I've seen requests like we have a mother who needs a stroller, and you know, they put that request out and the stroller arrives. filling closets full of winter clothing, and boots, things like that. So, I think one of the important ways we can help each other and help families is by putting the needs out there and creating spaces to ask and have our requests granted.
Thank you, Kristen. We're now going to turn the mic over to Shayna. Shayna, can you answer that same question? What would you like to see as one issue that you think is important for the NAEYC board to address if you're elected?
So if I were elected to the board, I think it'll be essential for NAEYC to continue to center and focus on the needs of educators, no matter what setting they're in and no matter what age group they teach. And how do we do that? So the first step I think that is essential is to ensure that NAEYC and its affiliates are financially sound. Kind of the whole idea of put your mask on before you help your child. You need to ensure that the organization itself has what it needs to continue to serve practitioners at a high capacity. Second, I think it's essential that we continue as the largest practitioner-led organization in the country, continue to lead advocacy efforts to get additional funding in our field at the federal, state, and local level. We desperately need more funding, and that it's important that we continue to beat the drum on that advocacy forefront, particularly amid COVID and as needs increasingly arise for social emotional support for children and families. Third, it's important for educators themselves to be physically and mentally well. And we need to think about what supports we can provide educators to support their mental health and well-being amid all the turmoil that's taking place in our country. And it also will be essential that we, as a practitioner organization, national practitioner organization, focus on particularly Black and Brown educators who are possibly vaccine hesitant, making sure we do a communications campaign to ensure the importance of vaccination, similar to other fields, because we really want to ensure that our educators are healthy. And finally, I think it'll be important and vital for NAEYC to partner with other organizations who are like-minded, who are focused on racial equity, gender equity, and pay equity. I think those are, and for the workforce, I think we really need to solve the issues within our own workforce and the equity issues within our own workforce before we can solve the issues in the field for children and families. We've been doing it in tandem, but I think it's really essential during this critical time amid COVID to focus on equity within our workforce, so that we can finally realize our, social justice foundations.
Thank you, Shayna. You talked about the funding issue. Can you speak a little bit, given your background and your experience, about how we can better access this public-private partnership for funding? Because it's all not going to come from the federal level, right? So can you speak to that a little bit, given your expertise?
Right. I think, private money from foundations really can help in the short term, but foundations themselves need to focus on investing in advocacy and racial justice work so that we can solve the root cause issues in the field in terms of funding. I think we've all known for a long time that our field isn't adequately funded to serve children at a high quality, to ensure that we don't have high turnover among the workforce and that we don't have continued burnout among the workforce. We've known this. We've, released reports on it. We've studied it. Now it's really time to put that research and that knowledge into action. And we've really seen amid COVID, with all the tragedy, that the workforce itself in the field has really coalesced and been able to work together, no matter the setting, whether you're a private, for-profit, or you're a home provider, or you're a center-based, large center. Everyone knows that it's important that we have similar messaging and that we advocate for funding at all levels. And private foundations can support that advocacy work and should continue to support that advocacy work. And I'll be continuing to advocate that amongst my colleagues in philanthropy.
Thank you, Shana. Stacy, we'll turn to you next. What issue will be a priority, do you think would be a priority for the board?
Thank you. I think a priority would be to continue to confront racial inequities. And I think that NAEYC has already done a good job of laying the foundation for this, particularly with the advancing equity in early childhood education. I believe that really working toward actualizing the things that are in this document is the work that NAEYC should be doing to actually address racial equity. For example, in the document, we talk about, kind of a critique of normative ideals of child development that are based on white, able-bodied children. So I'm thinking about also how we then talk about childhood in the social cultural context. So I'm thinking that we should also then start looking for theories that don't come from white middle-class men. And so then thinking about, as we're thinking about social cultural context, we should also be thinking using intersectionality, which is and applying that to early childhood, which is a Black feminist thought. So as an organization, how are we including Black feminist thought intersectionality to understanding children? And I think we allude to it in the document when we talk about African-American boys facing disproportionate discipline. So then we're talking about how gender and race intersect and cause oppression for these African-American boys. So I think we should really include this thought and really encourage educators to think using intersectionality. Also, we talk about whiteness. So as we're talking about whiteness in this document, and as we're talking to the early child education community, we should also include critical race theory, which is a Black theory that explains racism, the permanence of racism, talks about listening to counter narratives. And so I think that including these theories and being intentional about looking for and how to apply these theories to early child education would be very important and would be very helpful in helping us to actualize these important ideals that we have in this document. So I also think that to help us do that, we can also start really thinking and being explicit about talking to practitioners about childhood being a construct. In my teaching at Georgia State University in the teacher education program, I really foreground all of my teaching for pre-service teachers to start thinking about childhood as a social construction. We talk about race being a construction, we talk about gender, we talk about class, but also childhood as a construction. It means different things for different people in different times and different spaces. And so when we're talking about children and we're planning curriculum for children and activities and lessons for children, what child, I always say, what child are you talking about? What child is this good for? So foregrounding African-American scholars, women scholars, marginalized scholars in our work and in the training that we provide and in the thinking that we do as a board, I think would be very important to help us confront racial inequity.
Thank you, Stacy. You said that NAEYC has done a good job at addressing these issues. So, and then you gave us some context for that. How can we do a great job? How can we turn that good job into a great job? In particular, that intersectionality that you talked about. Go ahead, thank you.
I think by very intentionally, like I wear a shirt to class sometimes that says, decolonize your syllabus. So I think that we have to be very intentional about looking at the things that we produce, looking at what we're putting out, and see who's absent, and in bringing those voices in, whose voices are missing, who's not present, and who is present. So I think that's one way that we can be great. I think that's the way that we can be great. I think, like I said, I think this document is a good foundation. I think it hits all of it, but what we need to do to make it great is saying, okay, social cultural context. Let's talk about intersectionality right here. We talk about all these social identities, but how does race and class and gender and ability and all these other social identities intersect? So I think that and then when we talk about whiteness, let's really get these Black women, marginalized theorists in here and make those core pieces of our work. So every time we put a reference list at the back of what we're doing, we need to look and see whose voices are informing us and whose narratives are being told. So I think that's what's going to really take us to greatness and really be representative and be really working toward racial equity.
Thank you. Thank you, Stacy. And Ray, now it's your turn. So what do you see as an important issue that the board should be addressing if you are elected?
Thank you, Ann. Before I promise I'll get to that question. I just want to take a moment to say I've won elections and I've lost elections, and we're all and I felt the feeling of both of those, and I just want to commend NAEYC. We're all familiar with the phrase win-win situation. We are in a win-win-win-win situation in our category with the four of us and the other two. So we really are in win-win situations, and whatever happens here, I am proud to be part of this. And any one of these candidates in here that steps up and is in that position will fulfill it to the best. And as a member of NAEYC, I will be happy no matter what happens. And NAEYC has done a wonderful job. I just want to say that, it's not hard to turn on the news and feel the stress of what's happening in our world today. And, I have to feel that, it's somewhat attributed to the lack of social skills and tolerance that we have moved away from and modeled from. Our education system has moved towards inappropriate activities rather than developmentally appropriate activities, and really moved towards high stakes standards instead of play. And I think that it's an important aspect. And social skills and tolerance are not innate. I think that they are learned behaviors, and they need to be a part of not only early childhood education 0 to 5, but really through our K through 12 system. And I think that NAEYC can set that model, and we can do lead our colleagues in the public education system to really get back to social skills and tolerance. We're seeing the benefits of moving away from those things right now in our world, and it's not hard to turn on the TV. I'm reminded of my favorite quote. It's easier to build strong children than repair broken men, Frederick Douglass. And I think that it's a powerful statement in what NAEYC and what I would like to do with the board. But as I say that, I really have an issue that I have really had a passion about for the last 26 years that I have been in the field. And that issue that's closest to my heart is really moving the field of early childhood education, specifically 0 to 5, from an emerging profession to one that is undoubtedly recognized by society. Similar to public schools, the teaching, the nursing field, the lawyers and the police, those are undoubtedly, but our field is still, I remember 26 years ago when I started this journey, my professors were talking about early childhood as being emerging. And I still, to this day, 26 years later, we're still emerging. How can NAEYC, how can I, with my colleagues, be able to do something about it? I believe that we can utilize this pandemic to boost that effort. We have a highlight, we have a spotlight on us right now. And many people have realized and recognized our industry as essential, right? Everyone has talked about us as being essential. And yes, we are, but I really want to caution us from being satisfied with just that word of essential, because I remind you that Starbucks is also essential. And I love my Starbucks, don't get me wrong, but what we do and what Starbucks does is a different. And I feel that early childhood educators, we have a unique opportunity to work with children. 90% of brain development is happening in this window of opportunity that we have, and I think that we should jump on that. I would work with my colleagues on the board to brainstorm on how NAEYC could lead this effort in moving our field from the emergent state to obtain the professional recognition it deserves.
Thank you, Ray. You talked about tolerance. You mentioned it quite a few times, and I've been in the room when the conversation about teaching tolerance has been discussed, and there's colleagues that say, I don't want to be tolerated. So how would you address those folks that say, I don't want to be tolerated, I want to be included as I am, and that, teaching tolerance is not the way to go? How would you address those folks?
I think that it's about relationships. And when I talk about tolerance, it's really relationships. It's really understanding perspectives. I read, one of my other favorite quotes is talking about, being on the line where things are both sides. It's better to be in the middle of things so you can see both sides of perspectives. And really, when I'm talking about tolerance and I'm talking about social skills, I'm talking about relationships. Relationships really need to be the fundamental part of this whole foundation. And anybody that says something like that, I would bring it back to relationships and really say, this is what I mean by that. Understanding other people, and listening and being able to relate to others and have empathy and being able to perspectives. All those things are relationship bound. And I think that if we can get back to the importance of establishing relationships, everything is built on top of that. That is the foundation of everything. And so I think that's the way I would answer them, by saying, let's start with relationships. Let's start with talking. Let's start with communicating. And those are the skills. Those are the things that, and so maybe tolerance may not be, but relationship is.
Thank you. Thank you, Ray, Stacy, Shana, and Christina, for your responses. And now, Stephen, I'll turn it back over to you.
Thanks, Anne. The final two candidates are for president-elect of the board. We have two outstanding candidates. Vincent Costanza currently serves as an advisor for the Bright Start Foundation and lives in Trenton, New Jersey. Natalie Vega O'Neill is the president and CEO of Junior Achievement of Washington and Northern Idaho and lives in Seattle, Washington. I know both of you have demonstrated strong leadership throughout your careers. Leading the board will depend upon that experience. Here's your question. A new administration will be implementing their agenda beginning in 2021. President Biden and Vice President Harris have ambitious goals for education, childcare, and early childhood programs. What are 3 areas that you think NAEYC should help them to prioritize? And I think we will start first with Vincent. Why don't you begin?
Sure. Thank you, Stephen, and congratulations to my fellow candidates on their nominations. As governing board president, I'll look to serve the membership of NAEYC by assisting our organization and the incoming administration by prioritizing 3 strategies to address persistent and unacceptable gaps in our field, create a cohesive birth to 3rd grade continuum, and dignify the work that educators do every day in service to other people's children. So why are these the right strategies? To start, persistent and unacceptable gaps in our field manifest themselves in gaps of wages and access, with a workforce of early childhood educators that are predominantly women, 40% of whom are women of color, and over 40% qualifying for public assistance. It's time for our country to acknowledge, respect, and fund the essential activities provided by early childhood educators. This work is important for pay equity and because it contributes to access and achievement gaps. As stated in the NAEYC position statement on equity that many of my fellow candidates have quoted, all children have the right to equitable learning opportunities. Strategies that advocate for our workforce and the children they serve are needed to revitalize the early childhood profession. Next, we need to prioritize a cohesive birth to third grade system. So why is this important? Because sustaining quality matters. Research indicates that providing cohesion and continuity of highly effective practices in kindergarten through third grade are essential to strengthening academic gains made in preschool programs. But of course, teachers can't do this work alone, and they need the partnership of well-trained administrators, such as principals. So strategies and professional resources that support a coherent early learning system are needed and should be prioritized. And Stephen, here's the last thing. Strategies should be prioritized to dignify the work that educators do every day in service to other people's children. In childcare programs, in kindergarten classrooms where I used to teach, and I know you used to teach as well, in rooms with cribs and rooms with labs, the adults in all of these settings need to hear that we are with them at this difficult moment in history and always. So while policies to increase funding and ensuring equitable distribution of resources will certainly go a long way to dignifying the essential work of educators, hearing from our leaders that we are with you and you have a home with us will serve as the very fabric in the sewing of any policy solution. Without you, the members of this organization, the caregivers and educators, our field, and indeed the future of our country is nothing. It's upon many shoulders that I have the good fortune to stand to ensure that the work of our organization remains focused on child and family well-being at this particular time, and let it be known always. So to the members, please be sure to vote. Thank you for your consideration, and congratulations again to my fellow candidates.
Thanks, Vincent. Those are definitely three important priorities. Can you talk a little bit more about this birth to third grade system and maintaining that element of quality? We focus a lot on that 0 to 5 aspect in NAEYC, but often not as much on the K through 3. So how can we ensure that quality is sustained with those really critical investments we make in those early years?
So the first thing is I had the good fortune of serving on the board as a governing board member previously. And the thing that inspired me to run for the board for the first time was the strategic direction of NAEYC, which laid a stake in the ground that said the early childhood profession is in fact the early childhood profession that goes from 0 to age 8. In fact, the P is not preschool, it's prenatal. And we need to be concerned about what happens at that time. And we need to be concerned about what happens with teachers of 8-year-olds and third graders as well. So NAEYC, I would argue, has had for several years now, made a point to focus on unifying the profession and really making sure that the continuum is in place. And although we have focused, the organization has focused a while on 0 to 5, a lot of effort with the support of many people on the board, such as Anne, such as yourself, Stephen, a former kindergarten teacher, someone who's focused a lot on transition practices. NAEYC has put out several publications focused on the early elementary years and making sure that there's continuity of high quality education. Preschool education is important. It's not a silver bullet unless it's thread together with some kind of coherence. As studies such as recently a Vanderbilt study talked about the importance of continuity and high quality services. Good preschool is important, but you know it's also important? Good kindergarten, good first grade, good second grade, good third grade. As a father of a daughter who's a freshman in high school, I kind of think that's important as well. So we shouldn't stop thinking about how we advocate to tie together high quality experiences. It's not about a particular year or a particular range. It's about making sure that children have access to the highest quality experiences all throughout the entire educational experience. If we're true about the equity position statement, we're going to help educators to know what it looks like to implement that statement in practice throughout the entire early childhood continuum.
Great. Thank you so much, Vincent. All right, Natalie, what are 3 areas that you think NAEYC should help the next administration to prioritize?
Thank you. It's a great question. And like Ray, I just wanted to share my appreciation to each of you. And I agree that NAEYC's done an incredible job of getting a wonderful slate this year. And I love seeing the diversity of experience and the diversity of ethnicity and gender to represent the field and the membership. So it's wonderful. I, like everyone else in the field, I think has been closely watching to see and eagerly awaiting, what will rise as priorities for this new administration, how plans and systems of care are going to be addressed, and how the field is going to be rightfully honored and valued. And I'm very confident that our next administration will do just that. I was really pleased to see that the Biden campaign had released, their early childhood plan very early on in the campaign, which I think demonstrated the value that they place on early care and education and just children in general and those who care for children. As we know, there's so much that hasn't been done over the past 4 years for children and for children and for those in the field of early childhood ed. And so there's so much that still needs to be done overall, prioritizing around building a strong, unified, and well-resourced early learning system. So the places where I think that NAEYC can have the most impact and influence really starts with supporting our new administration and really succeeding on their goal of building back better, especially after this devastating and disruptive events of the past year and what continues now in 2021 even. Childcare is absolutely an area where NAEYC should be and will be a partner. Developing and advancing a system that provides stable and sustainable funding streams for childcare, and one that recognizes all aspects of care, from home-based care and center-based care to friends and family care, and school-based preschool as well. And I think ensuring that this system includes equity around access for children, especially for Black and Brown children, and especially for children living in poverty. The second area where I think NAEYC should be at the table, must be at the table with the new administration, is really leading on and being an expert advisor with support and development for our workforce. And we've talked a lot about that today here. A well-funded and sustainable mixed delivery system of childcare has to include ample, high-quality opportunities for the workforce to engage in both personal and professional development opportunities. I strongly believe that these opportunities should include access to mental health supports and resources, especially after what our providers and workforce have gone through this year with the mental and emotional strain, as well as resources around financial literacy and planning so that people can better save, invest, and spend their money, and as well as the professional growth opportunities and research-based training and best practices for the field. And an emphasis not only on a well-trained workforce, but also a well-compensated workforce, putting into place a system that attracts, retains, and develops a diverse and talented workforce is essential. And I think that NAEYC knows, how to do that and where it's working and best practices better than any other organization. And finally, I would say NAEYC needs to continue to build a movement of millions around early care and education. We need to continue to closely engage with local, state, and national elected officials, policy developers, and decision makers, and have a seat at the table when it comes to putting research into practice and policy. It's imperative that the policies that are developed reflect the most current and best research, and that the policymakers themselves are informed of the best practices and continuity of care for children and those who take care of children. So while we do have, I think a daunting time ahead of us, and sometimes it seems overwhelming, I really think it's an incredibly exciting time to be looking forward with hope and positivity and renewed faith and belief that this new administration will work on behalf of our country's children and those who care for them. And I would be honored to serve as NAEYC's president and work on behalf of this incredible organization and the committed and driven and resilient members who are out there every single day caring and advocating and nurturing our children. So I hope you will consider voting for me.
Thanks, Natalie. On your second point around personal and professional development for our teachers, caregivers, family child care providers, what does that look like? What are some specific examples to support teachers in their personal and professional development?
Yeah, I think that we have focused so much on utilizing research and best practices to really professionalize the field, to develop the professional strengths around teaching and caring for children, but we haven't focused enough attention on the individual people themselves who are in the classroom, in the childcare settings every single day with children, and the toll that that takes. You know, anyone that's a parent or interacts with kids on a regular basis knows that it's stressful and that kids come, you know, they're human beings, and that they come with their own unique sets of needs and experiences, and we're relying on the adults who care for them to be able to, you know, vacillate between all of these different needs and wants every day, and that takes a toll. And I think that part of, you know, the valuing of the field, the you know, lifting up the field to the level that others have talked about that it should and will be, I believe, really talks about, you know, it has to take into consideration and prioritizing the mental health and wellness of those who are caring for our kids. And so I do believe that, you know, with professional development opportunities, you know, should include, you know, giving them, you know, self-help, self-care skills, training how to do that, how to make sure that they're taking the time for themselves to take care of themselves. And then also I had mentioned previously, you know, financial health and wellness, and how, you know, we can support people in making good financial decisions and spending decisions. A lot of people that I've worked with across the course of my career who are in this, you know, field and working in childcare don't have a budget themselves, you know, and sometimes they live paycheck to paycheck. So how can we be a better resource to them to really, you know, show them how to make good investments, to good spending choices, and then have that financial security? So much of mental health and wellness is connected to financial health and wellness, and so how can we be, you know, better providers and supporters so that, you know, caregivers and childcare workers and educators are receiving the full continuity of care that they need as well.
Great. Thank you so much, Natalie. And thank you so much, Vincent. Really appreciate your conversation. And I'm going to turn back to you again. And you're on mute. It has to happen at least one time during a webinar, right? That someone's on mute.
There we go. Is that better?
Yeah.
Okay. Oh, thank you to all the candidates. We are so thrilled to have such a qualified slate this year. And it's been a real privilege for me to get to know you a little bit better through these conversations this evening. And so I thank you all. And thank you to the NAEYC members that joined us for this presentation. Voting begins later this month on January 15th. Don't forget, it extends through the end of February. And again, please go to the 2021 NAEYC Governing Board's slate webpage at naeyc.org to see the candidates' full bios, short videos before casting your vote. Become an informed voter. And as we know, voting is a responsibility of membership, but it's also an opportunity for you to help shape our organization. And so I thank you for your participation and for your viewing this evening, and please be safe. Thank you.